In the book, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain presents two types of education, moral and intellectual. Both of these are undoubtedly important for the characters, but does Twain portray one as superior to the other?
Intellect refers to the improvement of the mind in academic matters. This is given by adults and in schools. Intellect was required to fit in society. It is what made people important in the eyes of society. The people who had an intellectual education did not necessarily have a moral education. The characters that valued education in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn were Miss Watson, the Widow Douglas, the Duke, and the King. In Chapter 1 of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Huck says, "The Widow Douglas, she took me for her son, and allowed she would civilize me."
Moral education is that which defines what is right and what is wrong. This is not something that is easily taught in a schoolhouse. It comes through upbringing and personal values and experiences. In the book, Huck says, "Well, I weren't long making him understand I weren't dead. I was ever so glad to see Jim. I weren't lonesome now. I told him I weren't afraid of him, telling the people where I was. I talked along, but he only sat there and looked at me, never said nothing." Huck says this about Jim, a black man, even though he is taught that black people are meant to be slaves. He knows it's the right thing to do to help Jim. This shows how his morals are different from the rest of society.
Overall, Mark Twain seems to show moral education as being better, or he shows it in at least more of a positive light than intellectual education. The characters in the book that are honorable, Huck and Jim, are definitely not academic heroes. Huck comes from a background of almost no education. The little school that he went to was pretty much to spite his father, and Jim was a slave, so he had basically no education. However, these characters have a very strong moral compass. One example of a time where Twain shows Huck and Jim as being the moral characters of the story is when Huck says to Jim, "They're after us." Huck and Jim are both running from something in their lives, but the fact that Huck puts the label of us on the two of them is completely unheard of during the times because Jim is black and Huck is white. But because these characters are not concerned with the ideas and what's important for everybody else in society, they bond together. But notice that the characters of Huck and Jim, the characters who are moral, are not beacons in society by any means. These are the characters that are trampled upon, that are considered to be of little value in the world. So this is really where Twain is more calling out society on its ideals, on what it presents as important, on being too intellectual and not moral enough. Twain is trying to say that society needs to regain its moral education and find that human side of itself again.